Good to go, Kathy.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is the April 20th meeting of the Common Council's Planning, Land Use, and Economic Development Committee meeting. Council members present, committee members present, Judy Doche and Tom Hoey. Other council members are Wusu Anani. We have staff, John Raphael Pichardo and Danielle Gillespie. From the planning department, we have Director Brad Glass and Zach Powell. And I think that's it for now. We're going to begin the meeting by discussing Resolution 72120R, and that is a resolution declaring a climate emergency and calling for immediate emergency mobilization to restore a safe climate. And the sponsors here are Councilmember Anani. And if you could explain why you brought this resolution forth.
Yes, thank you so much. It's self-explanatory as it relates to prioritizing and also highlighting the fierce urgency of now as it relates to restoring a safer climate. As many of us are here aware, climate change represents probably the greatest threat, not only to our environment, but also to our economy. Facing the possibility of many instances of storms, out of whack weather patterns that affect production, frequent flooding in some areas, and droughts in others. The cost of letting this happen is too much to bear with. It is why we act, and that's why working with the Sustainability Committee and also Tina Lieberman, so individuals across, this has been a campaign all across our country, from smaller cities, larger cities, looking at all levels of government to prioritize and take action as it relates to making our environment much safer. This resolution is a good start in place to begin acting on the city's behalf, because it affirms to our residents and surrounding neighbors and even the world that Albany takes climate change seriously, and we're willing to do everything possible to make it happen. So I know I have Tina Lieberman here, who has also added some changes, current resolution, but this sets goals for our city, which is consistent with many of the actions that advocates have been advocating for over the past couple of years. And I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. I also want to thank Tina and also Sustainability Committee for all the support, and also councilors for their input on making sure that we prioritize addressing the direst need as relates to the climate, and also sending a message to our neighbors that this is an issue that the city of Albany care about. I'd like to turn it over to Tina Lieberman, if that's all right, and just talk a little bit about the resolution.
Thank you. Thanks, Augusto. And Tina, I apologize. I should have introduced you also. Tina Lieberman from the Sustainability Advisory Committee. And also I noticed Councilmember Richard Conti is also here. So welcome, Tina. If you could give us a little bit more information about this resolution.
Sure, thanks. So what I wanted to say is that I'm hoping that this resolution energizes our commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is something that we need to kind of commit ourselves to do. It was in our 2030 action plan, and it's part of our climate action plan that we were going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030. That is now a goal also for New York State in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. It's just extremely important that we move toward it. We also were able to add in information specifically about the city of Albany's greenhouse gas emissions, because now that we have an energy manager who's been with us just over a year, Jason West, he was able to do a greenhouse gas emissions inventory using all of our 2019 data, which we hadn't done, it was about 10 years ago that we'd had one done. So taking that, we now understand that our largest emission sector is in energy used for heating in buildings. So we really need to focus on building decarbonization with energy efficiency and switching off of fossil fuels. And then transportation is our second biggest sector for emissions. And so we also really need to focus on not just electrification of our fleets and electrification, helping support residents as they switch to electric vehicles, but we also have a wonderful pedestrian and bicycling master plan that we really need to implement so that we make walking and bicycling safe and attractive for people as an alternative. And I know Zach Powell is very involved in that, and it's a wonderful plan. So I think we really need to commit to it and commit resources to this so that we can move forward. So you'll find at the very end, there's a lot of real, focused ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the third area would be reducing landfill emissions, the methane coming out of landfills, which we now know is 9.1% of our greenhouse gas emissions, by diverting food waste from our landfill, which can also be used for food. We make compost and we can use it to improve city soil and be able to grow food, especially in food deserts in our neighborhood. So that's a win-win all around.
Okay, well, that's really terrific, Tina. And so I'm going to ask other council members, committee members first, if they have comments or questions about anything in the resolution or on the issue. Tom, Councilmember Holy.
Yeah, thank you. Tina, one of the things we're going to be dealing with later in the meeting is more and more, especially with COVID, drive-throughs where like drive-through testing, drive-through pick up food. Do you see this, while COVID's going on, as a problem, or is this something that we should start looking at now?
We can definitely, people are already asking us, we need more charging stations in downtown Albany. I mean, we could definitely be doing something right now. We need to pave the way. We also have this wonderful, as I said, the pedestrian and bicycling master plan. Are we going to, how quickly can we implement that? What does it take to make that happen more quickly rather than, putting it on a leisurely pace?
Okay, and was there anyone else? Judy?
So I'm trying to figure out what this actually accomplishes. It's not something that's being put in code. There's no funding associated with it. We have a bicycle master plan that is been worked on diligently. There's nothing to debate in this, but I feel like it's nothing but a feel good paying lip service to things that we all agree on. But how is the city of Albany going to reduce the amount of food waste entering the landfill? What are we doing to make sure that happens? I guess is the question. Is it just for example?
Well, that's a good example because we did get a DEC grant to reduce food waste. So we are working toward that. I think some plans are going to be unveiled in the next few weeks about that's moving us in that direction. But
this resolution does what though further to accomplish that? I mean, I think we spend a lot of time as a council on resolutions that are feel-good resolutions, when I would actually like to see where we are doing something very concrete to make sure an issue moves forward. I mean, Tina, you know me, I've been supportive of this. I have, been having Radix pick up my food scraps for years. You know, I don't have more than a kitchen bag's worth of garbage going into the, you know, into my garbage can. And sometimes I don't even, you know, put it out in any given week because I have so little garbage. What is the city, you know, if we want to talk about this, let's have some real tangible programming associated with that. And if the programming is happening and there's funding, what more does, you know, the resolution accomplish? Is yeah, I mean, I have a lot of, you know, questions about a lot of this, you know, and I think that this is really something that, you know, where is a work product coming from the sustainability committee to get the city to do something that we can say, here's a very specific program or plan that we need the council to do X on. This needs to be codified, et cetera, in order for it to actually accomplish something. So that's my frustration with.
I would say for the food waste aspect of it, that can be codified if it's approved in a solid waste management plan. But there are other ways to approach codification of that. But I mean, I turn it back to you folks. How do you take this? Can you use this to then think about ways, and we can work together? I think it's going to take the Sustainability Committee, the Common Council, and the administration to work together to see how do we take this and turn it into real action steps.
I'd rather.
And just to piggyback on what Tina,
Go ahead,
I think,
Owusu.
yeah, no, I think Tina laid on the head. This is not just as it relates to making our environment much safer. It's not just a one person or one department. This is all of us that to put our heads together and come up with some actionable items moving. But I do believe that it's important that we words matter, and words matter. And I think that coming from the legislative body of the city to come out with a resolution to let residents in the city of Albany know that we care environment, and these are some of the actions that we're going to take. Again, this is a breathing, living document. I understand where you're coming from, but I think that all of us have a role to play in addressing our climate issues.
JR, I see you've had your hand up. Did you want to comment?
I just wanted to clarify because one thing I'm trying to, with the USDO, I've been reviewing the comprehensive plan. I just want to clarify, is the 2020 Albany Climate Action Plan a subpart of the Albany 2030 plan? Because I'm looking at it right now and it is in there. I just wanted to make sure that if we're in this resolution, that it's actually reflected that it's also part of the Albany 2030 plan as well.
I'd have to go back and look. I believe it's mentioned in the Albany 2030 plan. Isn't that right, Tina?
Yeah, it's the climate action plan, and that is part of the Albany 2030 plan, which was issued in 2012, I believe.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure because I know going forward we're about to hit 2030 that, you know, something that we want to also, you know, any subsequent amendments to the comprehensive plan that we do soon.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's one, you know, we should go back and review that and see, take a look at it and see. I know that we're supposed to update it as we go along, so we probably should take a closer look at that. Anything else? And I agree with you, Owusu. I think there's value in bringing the issue to the public's attention. Once again, Earth Day is coming up. So people have had a lot of other issues on their mind this last year between the pandemic and unrest and on and on. So there's new funding that's coming from the federal government. So, you know, we can we should all be taking a look at what we can do to improve our environment and the climate, and you know, possibly use some of the funding towards that as well. So it's something for us all to consider. Does anyone want to put any other comments first by council members? And I should point out that Councilmember Ginny Farrell is here, and President Pro Tem Kelly Kimbrough is also here.
Kathy, I had one question for Tina that I thought of I'd like to ask, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, Tina, one of the things I've noticed, and I'd mentioned before about the COVID, is the tremendous amount of masks. Wherever I go, in parking lots, on the road, taking a walk, is there anything that can be done that we can get people to, you know, dispose of properly their face masks?
Well, I guess I would ask, yeah, we could certainly put out the word as best we can. We, you know, through various, our Facebook pages and the mayor's, you know, Facebook page. So that's something we could do to put out that information. And I think everyone is seeing that quite a bit. I guess also we typically have spring cleanups. And I think we're about to have one, the Riverkeeper sweep is coming up. So there is going to be some cleanups going on in Albany, but yeah, I think we all have to pitch in. And if folks here want to sponsor a cleanup, that would help too.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Is anyone else? And otherwise, maybe we could see if there's someone would like to put a motion on the table.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Is there any way we could form a little bit of a working group between the Sustainability Advisory Committee and some council members to now take this resolution and turn it into action?
Absolutely.
I actually think that would be a great thing to do before we pass a resolution, to actually have some identifiable goals by certain dates. What do we mean about increasing, you know, electrical charging stations? You know, the city has just added some. I have been in touch with Matt Peter and Jason, you know, about that as an issue. And I would like to see more being supported, and whether they are private or whether they are government sponsored kind of doesn't matter to me, as long as they become you know, more available for people, so that then encourages more purchases of electric vehicles in the city for a lot of people who wouldn't know how to go about doing that if they don't, especially if they don't have a garage with electricity in it or something like that. So there are things like that I would feel like we're accomplishing something with this resolution if there were actually identifiable goals that we're looking to implement.
Awuso, do you have any thoughts about that? It's your resume.
Yeah, I think this resolution has inspired, but I will see it pass. And, you know, once it comes to the floor for a vote, we can start putting them together. But it's like one of those things, what came first, the chicken or the egg? But I think that they're going to inspire, and I hope that so far it's already inspire Judy to think about this committee. So hopefully this also inspire our residents to also come up with some ideas moving forward once it passes. But I think that yeah, a vote on this will be.
I want to disagree with you with regard to this resolution inspiring me to think about committees.
That is true. Sorry.
I have, you know, this reflects issues that I have been working on for years. And, I, in the USDO, in my detailed review of that, Zach knows that I've provided input into the pedestrian bicycling plan and made sure my constituents were aware of that. I've talked to Tina, about composting. I've participated in the waste management discussions in this city. So this is not going to change my advocacy, on those issues. I've been doing that. And the question is, how do we as a council do something that results in real, tangible, collectively? What do we really do that results in real, tangible change on these issues? And I think that without specifying specific goals and doing things like, Ginny is working on the $15 an hour for all city workers, having a very specific goal and saying, this is what, and then having somebody say, I'm going to push on that issue with the administration and find out, how we're going to achieve that. And I see that Tom Hoey's hand is up. I'm talking too much again.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I want to support Councilman Anani's resolution, but Councilman Judy did bring up some points. Is there any way we could tweak this a little bit and try to get some specific goals in it and, pass it out a committee like that? Or is that possible?
Well, is there a suggestion as to a specific goal that you would like to see as part of the resolution? Either Judy or Tom. Tina had suggested developing some kind of encouraging council members to work with Sustainable Advisory Committee. I mean, in the past, what we've done is gotten together with the Sustainable Advisory Committee, have them report the work that they've been doing. And a lot of times their report does speak to some of what we're talking about here. There are goals that they set and action items and so on and so forth. And that helps us move forward as far as legislation.
So maybe we could put in something that Councilman Anani will work with the Sustainability Committee to point out some immediate concerns that we need to, as a city, to address. So I'll make the motion that we.
Actually, Tom, can I?
Sure,
can I
go ahead, jump in.
Yeah, I like this. So I actually think that for Councilman Member Anani to work with the Sustainability Advisory Committee to establish clear goals to implement each one of the resolved clause, each one of the items mentioned in the resolved clauses. That would make me feel a lot better.
Okay, Councilmember Anani will work with the Sustainability Advisory Committee to establish clear goals to, what was it, Judy?
To implement,
okay.
each one of the therefore be it resolved clauses in this resolution.
And now can that lead
And I'm okay with it.
Good,
Yeah.
thank you.
Can that lead to something going into the budget eventually so that we can do this? Because there's a lot of grants out there that we could make use of, but you need to have funding to enter into that. So like if we could set clear goals of action steps, then we might have a better idea of what kind of funding we need to make them happen.
That would show that, wouldn't it, Judy?
Well, I think that that's an excellent point. To have whatever the action items would be, then to evaluate how it's going to be achieved and make recommendations for the budget. Absolutely, that would, and I want to, you know, the city starts the budget process generally in the summer, you know, and probably before with, you know, each one of the departments, but generally, you know, aiming for midsummer for coming up with specific recommendations. And I think, you know, potentially coming to or sending a memo to the Finance Committee for it to, and maybe the Planning Committee, for it to consider advocating for the inclusion of those budget items. That could be some real significant outcomes from this resolution. That would be great.
Okay, so maybe we should add establish clear goal and develop action items to implement each of the clauses. Therefore be it resolved.
Right,
Clauses. All right, I'll make a motion to pass the resolution to the full council.
With those amendments.
With those amendments.
I think Tom was making.
I made that
Oh,
motion.
I'm sorry, Tom. Go ahead. I'll second it.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Motion passes and resolution goes to the floor for a vote. Thank you, Councilmember Anani
Unless
and Tina
Kelly Kimbrough decides to hold it.
for joining us. All right. Thanks, everyone. Now we'll turn to the amendments to the USDO. And let's see, I see Zach here and Brad's here. And which of you want to get started on tonight's agenda?
So I'll just do a real quick intro. You know, after we met a couple of weeks back, I met with their staff again, and you know, we kind of went through the permitted use table and concluded that we had some additional changes that we wanted to pursue with respect to that. So we are going to present additional items from that section. And then we also did want to start with or, you know, subsequent to that, go through a review of some Article 2 changes that we're considering. Some of them are substantial in the sense that they move content, either remove content from the code or move it elsewhere. Some of that content is redundant. So today, with respect to that, I'm going to kind of go through what we're looking to do and get some feedback from the committee members on that. So that said, I think Zach is going to kick us off with the Article 3 use table changes. So Zach, go ahead.
Can I just jump in here? Are you going to be using the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
Okay, and so Brad, maybe it's coming through my slow email, but you had sent us a PowerPoint and you said you were waiting for Zach to insert some slides. I'm wondering if you've passed that on to staff or us.
Yeah, I think actually, as I was speaking with you, Zach was sending that to Danielle and JR. So I think that should be what we have here. Zach, is that correct?
Yep, and I will start forwarding that right now. It's going to take a little bit of time just since the internet is a little slow, but I will try and get that over right now. Just trying to make sure I'm getting all of the council members on this.
Slide 1 of 54.
I'll be quick on
Some are
mine.
repetitive.
I can't speak for anybody else.
Some are repetitive and just include the same content, but add a few small things each time. So it's not as daunting, I promise.
And I'm sort of glad Tina is here. If she might want to stay on, there were actually a couple things that we were looking at that we may want feedback on moving forward. I think a couple of them actually came up in the preliminary discussion with drive-throughs and a couple of the other uses.
Just to clarify, all of these are the slide, this the PowerPoint, et cetera, and the memos are being uploaded to the department page?
Everything should be up to date except for the stuff for today's meeting.
Okay.
No.
Is it possible to get the stuff that you're talking about at the meeting up so that the public would have access to it? Prior?
We would very much like to do that. You know, we've got a lot of deadlines that we're meeting here, so oftentimes we're just finalizing
Yeah.
things prior to the meeting. I'm hoping that we can get out ahead of this a little bit
Right.
more, but we've kind of been.
Yeah, no, I totally understand.
Yeah.
You know, the ideal isn't always possible, but I appreciate that you actually have that page up.
Yeah, and again, if you have any suggestions for additional items to be added, it's a work in progress. So,
Yeah, I just think
Do that.
every document that we're talking about and that you're producing is what really needs to be there.
understood.
Brad, the revised USDO, has that been put into E-code? I know last time we had talked, you were getting around to it.
Well, I've been going back and forth with our contact there. I know Danielle has reached out to them as well. I kind of thought it was going to be a flick a switch sort of thing, but it hasn't turned out that way. But I'm actually going to follow up as we speak here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I
It's
just,
gonna be-
oh, I'm sorry, Brad.
I was just going to say it's going to be helpful for us too, because then we can create one working document. I think, you know, we should be able to export that in Word or a version that we can edit and get a working document up there for you.
So I just emailed a copy of the presentation to all of the council members that are present right now. I think my email is a little bit slow and not cooperative, so feel free to let me know if you haven't received it within the next couple of minutes. So I'll start. Perfect.
I got it.
Okay, perfect. Anyone not get it?
I have it also.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Farrell, as well. So I'm just going to try and go quickly, but feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions. I wasn't present at the last meeting, but I tried to put in some of the unanswered questions or content from the last meeting as well, so I'll try and address that as I go through. Councilmember Conti, you had asked about the webpage for the USGO review. So that's located as a subpage on our department website, and the link is included below. As part of the website, we have some of the graphics that we're proposing to use that Brad will be talking about for Article 2 to replace the existing district drawings. And the page also includes a meeting schedule with links for documents, as well as links for the video recordings for these meetings, and then also larger discussion topics for larger content items that are being discussed as part of the update. And then to Councilmember Doche's questions and concerns for multiple uses within the general section, there were some small edits that we're proposing just to clarify, changing the word from development to property, just to, since our current definition for property is talking about an action to a property and not necessarily a property itself. Adding that multiple uses are permitted when they're legally non-conforming. And then Councilmember Doche, I also know that you had, we're looking to change the word approval to permit for conditional uses, since that aligns with the process for applicants receiving those or applying for them. So Councilmember Doche has expressed concern with multiple uses within residential zoning districts. So just as a quick example of this, and I think it's a valid concern, and maybe the current language doesn't address what you're trying to get at, but there are properties within residential zoning districts. This one, for example, is the Albany School of Humanities that has 3 principal uses while being located in a R1M zoning district. It has a park, it has public utility or services minor, and it's a school. So there are instances where there are multiple uses. Sometimes they might seem not as intense as other principal uses. This is something that we're happy to work on to address any concerns with this, to get at the questions and the comments that you had at the previous meeting. Moving on to unlisted uses, our department had stated that we would have a more solidified process for classifying unlisted uses and interpretations. We are still working on this. Again, the goal with whatever process that we come up with is to better clarify what needs a formal interpretation, set standards for posting formal interpretations on the city's website, aligning the appellate process for interpretations through administrative appeals with the Board of Zoning Appeals. And there could be options for existing processes with USDO text amendments to have interpretations appear before the planning board at a public hearing to provide increased transparency for members of the public, and then also help make it faster if something is significant enough or there's a large amount of concern for an issue, to move that for a text amendment so that that can be immediately addressed. I'm going to be covering some stuff that Brad had covered at the last meeting, but again, this is just since there's some new content items, so bear with me, and apologies if this is repetitive. We are proposing to remove the district standard references at the top of the permitted use table. And based on feedback that we heard from some of the council members as well, and some discussions from our department about splitting up the land conservation district into two types of zoning districts, with one being PK for park and one NA for natural areas that are not as appropriate for any type of development or activity. And then also splitting up industrial districts and open space districts to create separate zoning district use classifications. And apologies, Councilmember Doche, you had your hand up.
Yes, can we go back to the slide on 375, 301? I'm having a little bit of a hard time keeping up. For some reason, it's not flipping pages for me on my thing with my screen. That's what you have there is not, these are just aspirational goals at this point in terms of what you're planning on doing, as opposed to language changes. And
Yeah.
this is not reflected in the separate documents that we received yesterday, right, Brad?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, just, all right. I'll probably come back to you after I take a closer, I mean, I don't know what the next step is here. You're going to take this and now draft something from it?
So Judy, there's a series of issues. I started sort of calling them out on the USDO webpage a little bit that are just sort of larger and more are going to require a little bit more work. I did put this into that category. I certainly think it's something we accomplish as a part of this project, but it's probably something that's deserving of its own memorandum. And we still do want to meet with Corporation Counsel. We haven't had a chance to connect with Brett yet. So I just want to make sure, and whatever we're proposing, we're grounded appropriately in law. So yeah, we're still working on the language, and we do expect to have like a memo on this topic in particular.
Great. And I think it was in the last meeting, and at some point, maybe whether it's this meeting or the next meeting, I think we should sort of put it as an agenda item, or maybe, somebody like me who cares about it should just talk to you about what might be some of the hallmarks of what a notice and opportunity to be heard kind of process would look like for I want to say some of these smaller decisions that hopefully don't necessarily have to go to a planning board. But I think you expressed agreement, you and your staff have expressed agreement that there should be notice to people who care when a decision is being made, and that maybe and that there is some sort of appellate process, which you have reflected here. And I think teasing out and having a little bit more of a working conversation about what that looks like and how we don't want to get it too bogged down, but we want it to achieve a certain purpose. But, I think the goal in a lot of cases is to allow the administration to keep on moving forward on issues without too much delay, because we don't want, to create a lot of red tape. But at the same time, where there are novel issues, there should be notice, and there should be potentially an opportunity for people to be heard, kind of thing. So I just think having a little bit of, there's lots of ways you can go about doing that. Lots of it, that's just part of administrative law. Maybe having a conversation with Brett, you and me, and Kathy, or Richard, or whatever, or a broader discussion that's, with the committee. But
Yeah, so you're thinking some sort of test scenarios or case examples that we could use to sort of apply in principle and see where we land?
yeah, and I think that this kind of tentative notice of decision making, two places where I see it coming up that's obvious to me is the unlisted uses and non-conforming use determinations. And I can certainly provide a couple of examples of that.
Sure.
I'm sure that pretty much every council member can provide an example of that, and looking at what interpretations have been posted, I think, is also really some of the test cases, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, Zach.
Yeah, and thank you for the clarification. That was just to make sure that we were addressing the topic, since it was brought up at the last meeting, and we were anticipating to talk about it tonight, but we're still working on it. Just making sure that no one else had questions. Okay, and I'm gonna keep proceeding.
Well, actually, Zach, when you went over the two PK for park, NA for natural areas, and what was the next two that can you just review that?
Yeah, so with
Industrial
this slide,
districts.
yeah, so currently industrial districts and land conservation are grouped together under a classification known as special purpose. So this is just separating those to have industrial districts by themselves and open space districts by themselves.
Okay, thank you. Just
because special purpose didn't seem necessarily like the appropriate term to classify those. So, and I'm just going over this a little bit again, just because the new classifications being proposed are just gonna come up as we go through. Again, this is going over content that was presented at the last meeting of creating a new land use category for utilities and infrastructure, and listing some new uses such as small wireless facilities and solar farms, and their allowances are shown for the open space and industrial zoning district categories. This was also presented at the last meeting of removing the V designation. With this presentation, though, we are proposing to change some of those classifications to either C for conditional or P for permitted use. And while it's not shown here, some of the P allowances and C allowances, specifically within the RT zoning district are limited to existing ground floor storefronts or pre-existing non-residential structures. And just as a reminder, currently with the V or vacant uses, these have to be buildings that have been vacant for 5 or more years, and the applicant would still need to get a conditional use permit in order to use the site for that use. So this is, I think as Brad had mentioned at the previous meeting, trying to eliminate the time that a building is vacant and make sure that's being reutilized. But for some uses, it does make sense to continue looking this through a conditional use permit process and provide opportunity for public comment. Another big thematic change with this presentation is increasing the number of use allowances in industrial districts. For a lot of the I-1 or light industrial zoning districts, there are a lot of existing permitted uses, and just carrying some of those over into the I-2 zoning districts, based on some feedback that we've received from people who have submitted application to our department or to the building department. Adding urban agricultural as an accessory use, adding bar tavern as a permitted use within the I-1 and I-2 zoning districts, as well as restaurants, funeral homes or crematoriums, changing offices from an accessory to a permitted use in the I-2 zoning district, and then adding some accessory uses within industrial districts, specifically with the first two for composting of household waste and home occupation. We do allow for live work dwellings. So just trying to recognize that people do live in these districts and allow for them to have the same rights as other people living in other non-industrial districts, allowing for rain barrels, and then also allowing for sidewalk or outdoor cafes, and then also allowing for farmers markets within I-2 zoning districts as a temporary use.
So I just want to point out that you said live work, but actually a home occupation is not a live work. Are we changing the live work under residences to allow that in industrial?
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. So for live work dwellings, and for anyone who's on right now who's not familiar with those are structures that have to have a connection between the dwelling unit and the commercial element of the building. So really when we were thinking about this, we were thinking of instances where maybe, a household lives within a live work dwelling, and maybe one person works in the work portion of the live work dwelling, but maybe another household member is operating a home occupation. So just trying to think of those instances and just try and allow for those instances in the event they happen. Again, we have not seen anyone use a live work dwelling so far with the zoning code, but again, just trying to provide more parity and equity throughout zoning districts for the live work dwelling use.
So my point is, live work actually doesn't show up on this chart. You have home occupation, which is different. So live work,
yes,
live work would be under the land use category of residential, not accessory. And I'm fine with having home occupation there as well. But if your intent is to include live work, then you need another line up above.
Yeah, so live work dwellings are currently permitted in industrial districts. This is just showing new use allowances that are being proposed for Article 3.
All right.
And sorry for the lack of clarity in that when I was presenting on that.
Zach, I got a fast question on the under civic and institutional uses, religious institution, and I'm just trying to make sure I'm understanding this right. So in an I-2, like which would be heavy industrial, I believe is what you said, we could have like a church or something like that built. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, currently right now it's listed as a conditional use, but what we're proposing is just allowing it as a permitted use.
Now, if somebody sets up a church, and this is an industrial area, and then a factory opens up and it's noisy or whatever, could we run into problems? What makes me think of this is, a lot of people like to live out in the country, and I know some counties have to do right to farm legislation. So, you get so many people live out there, they don't want to live next to, a cow farm or something like that. Could this open up problems for us? That's my only question. Thank you.
Yeah, and right to farm is kind of a unique scenario. There are not too many, there are not as many uses that have those guaranteed rights. Usually there's something that are in the public interest that prevent people from banning them. And I think in a lot of religious institution is a pretty expansive category. And there's some religious institutions that meet daily. There's some that only meet weekly. So, I think it's probably going to be dependent on the use, but they're already permitted within I-1 zoning districts as well. And I think have a lot of similar potential issues or characteristics. So it just seemed a little odd that we weren't treating it the same going forward. But I think it is good to bring up and good to think about as we're going through this.
Thank you.
If I can just chime in there, it's a great point, and something that you need to see the flip side. Of course, you want to, why wouldn't you let a church be there if a church wanted to be there? But they might then wind up, unbeknownst to them, being located next to some new development that they are then opposed to. In our case, I'm looking at the map, and it looks to me like we have I-2 in two different places. One is the Port of Albany, and the other one is that industrial park area out by I-90 off of Everett Road kind of thing. And it's kind of, Tom, I think that my gut with regard to that, if anybody's going to locate a church or any of these other things in either of those locations, then they are on notice. It's not like it's going to be some sort of surprise to them. Oh, I wound up next to, a wind turbine factory or something like that.
Or now, do we allow adult bookstores in I-2, I thought, or am I off on that?
Yes, I believe we allow adult retail in I-2 zoning districts.
So that, Judy, that's, if a church opens up and then next door, but like you said, the two areas that we're looking at, most likely a church wouldn't have there, but we never know what's going to happen 5, 10 years, 20 years down the road. So, well, I just make the point. Thank you.
Any other questions on the added use allowances for industrial districts? Okay. So moving on, we're also proposing some additional use allowances for the new park zoning or PK zoning district as well. Adding new civic and institutional uses, urban agriculture, food uses, office and services, accessory uses, and temporary uses. And the footnote is not included with this, but again, the intention with the open space district is to limit the amount of development on a site. So we are going to be looking towards developing a footnote that limits, the percentage of the site or size of any proposed new structure within a park. So again, the focus is the green space within the zoning district, but we have heard people express an interest, to maybe open up a beer garden within the city or encourage more food and beverage service within city parks. So this is just trying to accommodate for some of those instances and requests that we've been hearing.
Yeah, and if I could just add there really quickly is, I think in most, if not all cases here, the land in the park is going to be publicly owned. So there would be, ability to curtail any, sort of undesirable activity through, the general process of the city-owned property and needing permission. But I also think we'll look at some use-specific standards, just to be clear that we're not opening up the Parks District to development. It's just to accommodate those ancillary uses and make sure that when people are doing those sort of activities that they're in line with our USDO ordinance.
Can I ask a question? From the Sustainability Committee, we're working on creating a network of community compost drop-off sites. And in addition, we would like to, we're working on a commercial composting facility option, possibility. How would those fit in with what you have here?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. I'm just going back to our permitted use table just to make sure that I'm answering correctly. I believe that would be falling under, bear with me just one second. I believe that would be falling under waste recycling processing facility right now. I think it's something that, speaking for myself, but I think, we'd be happy to work to maybe find a new use classification or definition for that, because we have been hearing an interest for, more neighborhood or community-based, trash or composting options. So happy to work with you on that. We do have the household composting listed as an accessory use, but it's potentially something that we can build from to recognize the work that SAC is trying to do for this.
Okay, that sounds great. Let's be in touch on that, because I think that's the way of the future.
I got a fast question on like with the park and temporary uses. When we have like Lark Fest and the different festivals where we have food areas set up, would that be considered under temporary? Or even food trucks where they drive and they cook within the truck. Is that covered in here?
So from my understanding, and we've been having more conversations about this within our department, areas that are within the city's public right-of-way aren't covered with the USDO. So a lot of the stuff like you're speaking to with Lark Fest would go under special events and permitting through the city. And the state does have its own program, or excuse me, I believe the police department has its own program right now for food vendors around the Capitol. We have talked about, mobile vending or temporary vending through our USDO as well, but a lot of that is limited to, a period of less than a month or on private property. So we don't see that come up as much. Was there some concerns or questions that you had on that?
Well, I just
maybe
didn't
have the
see
USDO address that better.
I didn't see it. That's why I was just asking about it, because I know it is popular. And as time goes on, as the years go on, it's getting more and more popular, and we see a lot more of it. So it's just, I'm thinking like Washington Park. I forgot that there's roadways in there, which is the public right of way. So I think you've covered it. I didn't know if we, I think in the future, if we need to put something in, we can. It was just one of those things. I didn't see it and I didn't understand. Thank you.
Good thing.
I just chime in here on the laboratory research facility in an open space. Minimally, that has to be a conditional use permit, because that's very expansive. I know that you're talking about putting some sort of footnote in it, but until we see criteria or how you're going to address that, I think that really you're talking about it has to be a conditional use, and that just comes from 25 years of regulating clinical and environmental laboratories and being involved in oversight of research. It's just a little, you may mean some very innocent things, but by just making it an outright permitted, you're really opening the door up to a wide variety of things.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. We are looking to limit the footprint for any future buildings. And, I think with our previous conversations about that, that was mainly trying to address, small research that might be going on, within the Pine Bush Preserve if they're trying to do testing or any field research that's going on. So happy to come up with or develop language that really gets at what that's trying to address. And if that's not able to cover it as well, I think, again, it's a great point to look at making that a conditional use as well. I don't think it's going to be a very common use, but it's good to make sure that it's not creating a noxious situation moving forward.
And when you talk about a building, normally if somebody's doing research in the Pine Bush, it would essentially amount to specimen collecting sites. They wouldn't necessarily really be doing the research there. This is all in a sense, it can be sort of like, oh, your home has become a laboratory because you're using a home test kit. It might, it might be overkill and suggest a little bit too much.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And so maybe that's just looking to designate it under a different use classification, or just, again, spell that out better within the use specific standards. But that's a great point. Any other questions for this slide? Okay. Brad had presented this at the last meeting as well. This is just adding that there's a change from multifamily detached dwelling, just changing that to multi-unit detached dwelling. And also the addition for 3-unit detached dwellings as a conditional use within the mixed-use form-based Midtown zoning district as well. Just to align that with the conditional use listed for the mixed-use form-based Central Avenue zoning district. Moving onward, we had just discussed this with Councilmember Doche, but this was just showing the use allowances for the open space area. But this is something that we'll need to work on to better elaborate on through use specific standards or a different allowance for laboratory or research facility. And we are also proposing to change from the previous presentation, allowing medical clinics as a permitted use in the mixed-use form-based Central Avenue zoning district to a conditional use, just because we've seen a lot of traffic impacts related to institutions and facilities that are providing medical services along Central Avenue. So there are some traffic-related impacts that would probably be good to better examine and determine conditionally whether the siting is appropriate. Continuing onward, another larger change is allowing lower intensity uses within the mixed use neighborhood edge zoning district with personal or business services changing from a conditional to a permitted use. and allowing artisan manufacturing. We've definitely heard feedback that based on the stop and go nature for some personal or business services, that's why this was originally designated as a conditional use. So I think it's potentially an opportunity to again add more use-specific standards for the operating characteristics or for the size of the proposed personal or business service, to make it easier for the lower intensity personal or business services to operate within the mixed-use neighborhood edge zoning district, but again, require more stringent requirements for higher intensity or larger personal or business services moving forward.
Zach,
Yep.
can you go back one slide? The conditional use for mixed use Central Avenue, you made it conditional. Is it conditional for some of the other Midtown? Okay, I wasn't sure. No, for medical clinic. Why just for medical clinic? South End, it would be permitted. Warehouse, it's permitted. You're not concerned about traffic in other areas?
No, I think, traffic and transportation and parking and access to a site are something that we look at for all projects. It's just, I think with Central Avenue currently right now, we've seen a lot of instances where there are traffic impacts for Medicare, Medicaid vans that are picking up and dropping off people for certain other uses as well. So I think, again, with the more limited amount of parking for mixed-use form-based Central Avenue, I think it's good to think about that on a conditional level, just to recognize that there are certain transportation limitations right now within that zoning district. And similarly, that's why we have it as a conditional use for mixed-use form-based Midtown as well. Again,
but not
to
the
say that
South End. We wouldn't need it there.
I think Kathy's
not
raising a
currently,
good
but
point.
I'm just
Yeah, and if
saying
that's
it
something-
could be an issue at some point in some of these other community
South Earl-
MUCI district. Could it be an issue, let's say?
Yeah, and I think for your point for mixed-use form-based South End, definitely good to think about, and if there's a concern, for the transportation elements there, that's definitely something good to think about. The reason we had it as permitted for mixed-use campus institutional is just because the use aligns with and is usually more expected within that zoning district as well.
Yeah.
So that's why we were putting it as a permitted use. But again, if there are use classifications or changes that you think we should look at, happy to do that.
Mixed use DT, that's downtown, right? What's the MUDT again?
Mixed use downtown?
Mm-hmm. Should that be permitted? I mean, or can you run into the same problems with a medical clinic, that type of medical clinic located there as far as traffic?
I think you could. I think, again, it's more just that Central Avenue right now has a lot of stop and go traffic, and we've just seen a lot of instances on Central Avenue where there are transportation impacts related to medical uses. But again, if that's something you'd like us to look at for other zoning districts, happy to do that.
Well, just pointing it out for the future, if a medical clinic did want to open up in the downtown area. It was just a thought, not.
We'll take a look at our rationale for that and apply it across the board and see what we come up with. Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah.
And that could be a good use specific standard just for all zoning districts, just to make sure that we're thinking about drop off and pick up specifically for that use, since that's an issue that might come up more.
Thank you.
Okay, and any other questions for this slide? Okay. Continuing onward, another larger change was just the increased number of accessory uses within all zoning districts, and then allowing for temporary farmers markets in the majority of zoning districts, except for the NA or the proposed NA zoning districts. So this would include cabarets, electric vehicle charging stations, sidewalk or outdoor cafes, and again, the farmers markets. With farmers markets, we're looking to develop use-specific standards just to ensure that there are not negative impacts within, the PK or the residential zoning districts as well. And Brad had covered some of this material in the previous meeting as well. Any questions on this slide?
Yeah, and I'm getting confused. What's the A stand for again, please?
Natural area.
So it wouldn't be allowed? I mean, you have a cabaret in a residential area. Is that what you're saying?
Are you asking about NA, or are you just asking about the A classification?
Yeah, the A classification. What does the A stand for?
Got it. Sorry about that. A stands for accessory.
So somebody like in my neighborhood could open up a cabaret next door to me, or is that?
So that would be an accessory use. So part of the justification for this is, there are a lot of religious institutions that have, amplified music, or they're existing legal non-conforming restaurants or establishments that already have live entertainment as an accessory component of the use. So this was just looking to recognize that in a lot of instances, and cabarets go through a permitting process through the city clerk's office. So there is additional review, through council members, through city departments as well. And there's an opportunity for public comment as well. So this was just looking to recognize that there are, accessory cabaret uses already in effect in residential areas, but just, again, still maintaining that there will be that review through the city clerk's office and opportunities for public input and input from council members and city departments.
I wasn't aware of that, and I'm kind of concerned that somebody can open up an outdoor cafe right next door to me. I'm in a quiet residential, but we've seen stranger things get approved. So I guess it's something we'll have to talk about, I guess.
Hey, Tom.
Yes, sir.
I think the reason that we're adding those in is because there are separate, more behavioral oriented permits, specifically with the cabarets that do sort of control those uses. Particularly with the cabarets, I mean, it's really only a secondary regulation through our USDO. It's just basically saying that they're allowed as an accessory use. Generally, they're regulated through that separate permit process. Cafes are a little bit different. And I think, as we get into the use specific standards for cafes, which will probably be our next meeting, we can talk more specifically about what sort of conditions we need on those in certain circumstances, because there are a number of other issues related to cafes that we need to cover as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I want to ask a question. The golf course, would that be park area or would that be NA, natural area? I guess it would be park, right? Because I'm thinking about Martell's. Martell's would be like an example where there's, I believe that is within the park area. Yeah, I'm just wondering, we'll have to take a look at your map when you have NA. I really don't know how many areas there are that then are not a city park.
It would be, for example, the Pine Bush Preserve. We would probably consider even Tivoli Preserve and perhaps the Corning Preserve as, natural areas. And then there are a number of lands that are set aside as a part of cluster subdivisions or are in floodplains
Along
along the Norman
85.
Scale. But yeah, we do need to get that map. And this was another area where we're going to produce a separate memo stating our rationale for splitting that up into two differences and, the different use allowances that we would be conveying in each district.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Just going back to what Tom, just to make sure about the permitting process. I'm not sure how much you've used that out in the 15th. But that goes through the city clerk's office and we get all the departments to weigh in about whether or not the, for example, a cabaret should be located in a church, is it disruptive and so on and so forth. But that's a whole separate process from the USDO.
And cabaret is more or less just live music. That's not acoustic, that's amplified. And yes, the process, I know at least the initial application for the establishment or for the use, the church, would be subject to a public hearing. I do think renewals are issued without a public hearing, but I think the reason we went from regulating cabarets or live entertainment through zoning was it's more of a behavior-oriented enforcement effort. So that gave us the ability to enforce based upon behavior, which zoning is really not geared as well to do that.
And if I may add, we have, if we've received a large number of complaints when a permit has been issued for a cabaret, requested the applicant to come in for a subsequent public hearing. We have that latitude.
Or if there's instances for repeated police or fire incidents as well, I believe that also can prompt a new hearing as well. But correct me if I'm wrong on that, Danielle.
You are correct. And there have been instances where a cabaret has been revoked. And it has been noted that in this particular area, we will not issue to this establishment, we will not issue an additional cabaret license until they remediate whatever the issues were.
I would like to suggest on this map that we add as an accessory use in NA electrical vehicle charging station. I think would be great to go to the Pine Bush and while you're taking your hour walk, be able to charge your car or Tivoli or whatever.
We will add that.
What? You'll add that? Great.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, we wouldn't have a lot of charging stations out there, so it's not like all of a sudden you have, the equivalent of a gas station, but putting an outlet or two out there would be fabulous. Putting a Tivoli.
Any other questions for the accessory uses in farmers market? Okay. So now I'm going to move into some of the uses that we're looking to either completely remove or just limit on a larger scale. The first being just prohibiting all new pawn shops. Currently, they're allowed as a conditional use within the mixed-use community highway zoning district, and they are permitted in the light industrial or I-1 zoning district. And this just comes from the operating characteristics and negative land use impacts that they have in terms of stop-and-go traffic and crime, which can also have additional traffic impacts as well.
Have you checked with a council's office on whether we can do that, essentially prohibit a type of business completely?
Good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can check with them on that. Usually when you're looking to prohibit any new to prohibit a use, you usually just provide a justification similar to an environmental assessment, just looking at the impacts of the use and why you're proposing to prohibit said use, which we would be looking to provide as part of this proposal.
Do we have any pawn shops in the city?
We do. I know we have one on Central Avenue, and Brad, it looks like you were unmuting, so feel free to tack on.
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, is there a consensus that we don't want any pawn shops? I mean, I think there may be that consensus. I think it was something that was accommodated. There really aren't that many of them, and it may not be something. So certainly we want to get council's opinion.
So
on
if one
that.
is currently, if there is one on Central, I think I remember one on Central. I haven't seen it. I don't know if it's there, but if it is there and operating, they would be allowed to continue as a grandfathered use, or they would have to discontinue.
Yeah, they would be
They'd be
allowed
allowed
to
as a, yeah.
I didn't realize there was stop and go traffic associated with pawn shops. Isn't that what you said, Seth?
There's stop and
Yeah,
go
I mean,
traffic with
when-
everything on Central Avenue.
Well, that I know that, but I didn't know any was related to, oh, it's connected with the other stop and go traffic.
I don't know.
Oh,
I see three pawn shops on Central, 71, 137, and 1321. I don't know if that's Colony or not, but just to let you know.
1321 might be Colony.
Well, I'm fine with this.
Moving onward, this is limiting the allowances for automobile washes, changing it from a permitted to a conditional use within the mixed use community highway or MUCH zoning district, removing as an accessory use from the mixed use downtown zoning district, and changing from an permitted accessory use to a conditional use in the MUCI zoning district, and removing it as an allowed use within the mixed use form-based Central Ave zoning district, while retaining it as a conditional use in the light industrial and as a permitted use in the heavy industrial or I2 zoning district. And this is again just as an effort to try and move away from auto-centric uses. Automobile washes also just have a lot of environmental impacts for water usage and water contamination as well. So trying to reduce and in some cases remove that from zoning districts.
Why the difference between the I1 and I2 districts? One's conditional, one's permitted.
I think it's because for I2 zoning districts, they are a lot of times sites that are already pre-contaminated or have ground contamination already, whereas I1 it might not be as likely. There are also probably situations where there are heavy vehicles that are washed, potentially within the port or within the I2 district along I-90 that we might not be aware of as well that would classify under that use. So that's probably why, and they're usually not as public facing of zoning districts or as public facing of a zoning district as well. So that's why there currently is the difference between the two.
I say, I never think of a car wash as being an environmental problem, so I feel better about never getting our car washed now.
I am wondering, so a car rental place needs to have a car wash, right? I'm wondering if we're allowing for that. I don't know is Hannaford MUCU or MUCH? I forget.
CH.
All right, so that would be allowed. And I think that for my dealership no longer does this, but some places when they do your car, they do a car wash at the same time. So I'm wondering if there are any dealerships that we are then impacting, but I'm thinking that most of them would be in a MUCH or an MUCI.
Or the car rental like you haul down on Broadway there. What that is. I don't know how that sounds.
Yeah. And I think most of the dealerships and car rental places are typically located within MUCH zoning districts. You know, the U-Haul on Broadway, that's located in an I think that's MUFS, or I believe, or MUDT.
Would it be helpful for council members to be able to see maps go along with these proposed changes, show where it's currently allowed and where it would not be allowed as a result of the change?
Yes.
It is helpful sometimes to have a map in front of you.
I'm on our map geo. I have that map. So I'm looking at some of this stuff. I don't, so yes, if that is not too taxing for staff to add that to the presentations, I'm thinking that that could be a lot of work. You might want some selected areas, selected topics, as opposed to doing it to all, depending upon the amount of work that involves.
Okay, we'll take a look and we'll see what we identify, and then if we miss any, you can fill us in. It's one of the things I think we'd like to show on Map Geo moving forward, is to be able to, you know, if you're looking to do a certain use, that it would actually highlight the properties that use would be allowed, which I think would be very helpful, as opposed to just having to know that it's allowed in a district. It's going to take a little bit of work, but we're talking to them about that.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I got just a comment. Car washes turn out to be probably more environmentally better than people washing cars at home. In the car wash, the salt and I'm thinking of the wintertime, and I do wash my car quite often in the wintertime for safety reasons, keeping my glass clean. Also, salt rots the metal in the car. So, you know, and what they do is they recycle that water that goes through. So, and, you know, maybe the study, again, this is what I've read years ago, but I mean, we could look into it a little bit more, but I think it's more environmentally friendly than just allowing people to wash cars in their driveway or, you know, somewhere else. I am concerned, there are a lot of gas stations. I know the mobile station up by me, and I'm not sure of the district up there, Brad, but they have a small, like one block building that cars one at a time can go through and get clean. I just want to see something like that go away. It's been very successful. It's not like a massive traffic generator, but again, I don't know if it's already in this the mixed use, which one it's in. So.
Yeah, Tom, we could take a look at that, and maybe this is somewhere where we could ask the sustainability committee to weigh in on the environmental side of things. But also, I mean, I think what is the bigger concern for me in making this, and again, we're not prohibiting, we're just making it conditional, is some of these larger automobile wash cleaning stations I've seen. There's one out in Gilderland on Route 20, for instance. They're pretty significant in scope and would be, you know, something in the city. I think we'd want to have a little bit of control over the design and characteristics of that. So I think that could be a secondary reason to pursue the change.
Yeah, you're right. And again, I'm even thinking at the dealerships, they're not going to have a huge thing. It's just like a one booth car wash. So one car at a time can go in and it's controlled. And you're right. I'm thinking of Colonial Car Wash up in Gilderland. I mean, they have vacuums, they have a bunch of stuff which wouldn't fit into a city environment. So I appreciate that.
Good. This is a productive conversation.
All right, moving on from car washes.
This is transitioning into vehicle fueling stations. Again, as we're looking forward to people using alternative fuels or completely electric cars in the future, trying to shift away from new vehicle fueling stations. Again, this is promoting gasoline usage in a large part, and there's also just a lot of, transportation design concerns, and also when a site is abandoned after being used as a gas station, that creates a contaminated site, which is known as a brownfield. So that requires a lot of funds in order to clean up to be reused for a different use. Currently, we're proposing to remove it from the majority of mixed-use zoning districts while still allowing for it in the mixed-use community highway zoning district as a permitted use and as an accessory use in the mixed-use campus institutional zoning district and as permitted within industrial districts. I think this is something, as mentioned in the memo, it would be good to think about maybe including additional standards potentially for prohibiting underground gasoline storage, incentivizing reuse for alternative fuels, and just more stringent design standards for principal and accessory structures as well to make them friendly, for pedestrians and cyclists as well. Since a lot of times these fueling stations have very large curb cuts and there can often be conflicts between cars themselves as well as other types of modes.
It's an intriguing issue. As I'm looking at this, one of the things I think about is that there are some areas for which it can be very inconvenient for people to get their car filled up with gas in historically underserved areas. But you also don't want to have a lot of them. And I know that you had recently had an issue down on South Pearl with a particular gas station and some modifications that people wanted to make to that. But I look, for example, in the South End, is that the only gas station that services people down there? And for somebody there to get on the highway, where would they have to drive if that particular gas station did not exist?
Which gas station, Judy?
This one right by the old DMV where the Board of Elections is now.
I think
There is a station in the Port of Albany. I've gotten gas there and diesel.
I think we need a map, and I think we wanted to just start the broader conversation. I mean, and it does say vehicle fueling station. I mean, we're speaking more to gasoline fueling stations, but as we switch to renewable fuels, what are those? It may be a totally different scenario, and I think we just need to be conscious that these are brownfields. And we see an example like on Colvin and Washington, where a new gas station wants to locate directly across from an old gas station. I think it's like Judy said, it was intriguing from my perspective too. And again, maybe this is a sustainability sustainability committee discussion that we can collaborate with them on getting some more details on which direction to go.
So I wonder if this is one of those things that you put a sort of a sunset on new approval, like maybe in 5 years, revisit the issue. But in the meantime, also, like, I don't have a problem with the potential of my neighborhood losing the one gas station that it has. And then there's a couple gas stations within a half mile to a mile that people would have to go to instead. That does not seem to me to be particularly burdensome, but
Which gas station are you talking about?
well, if the mobile gas station shut down, you
The
know,
one, you mean the one on Quail in New Scotland?
yeah. So if that
The one
would
that I use all the time? No, I'm just kidding.
right. The one that my husband uses all the time, because I sent him to, you know, but then we would drive to Stewart's or we would go over to Delaware Avenue, Kathy, and that would not be a tremendous hardship. It certainly is, you know, convenient, but it does
Well,
get
you save on the weekends by going up to the mobile up by further out into Scotland Avenue. So you can go there too.
yeah, and actually come to think of it, there's like 3 up there in that area.
That's
In
right.
the 8th, I wouldn't mind losing one of them, but and I do think that we I think that we probably need 2 different classifications of fueling vehicle fuel, like a vehicle fueling station being gas or diesel, and another one for we have electrical charging. Is that only an accessory use? Is that what we've done with that? I wonder if we want to bring that out of accessory use. Yeah, so we have electrical vehicle charging stations as accessory uses.
Yeah, I think the way that I distinguish it, and Brad, correct me if I'm wrong on this, is I think with electric vehicle charging stations, those are an accessory use where the act of charging the vehicle is not as a service or for fee, so it's not being monetized, whereas with a vehicle fueling station, the act of charging your vehicle would be monetized.
All right, so I do think that it's worthwhile to break it out into gas, diesel, and electric, because I think over time and with regard to how we view this, it's going to be different. Hannaford has, for example, an electrical charging station there. And we wouldn't want to encourage like another gas station to be located there, but we may want to be more permissive with regard to vehicle charging stations in this category and fueling. And I just think doing that now, I mean, I don't know how many distinctions we'll make now, but doing it now and looking to the future and being very conscious of what we're encouraging and what we're restricting is important.
We are declaring a climate emergency after all.
I do think this is kind of a big step, but I think it makes sense. And I also think, you know, we're not talking about design standards here, but that's a big issue. I imagine we'll talk about that later. Because even some of our gas stations that currently exist, I mean, they're all, so many of them are becoming these mega stations. And, you know, with the stores and then the huge, I don't know what you call it, over the pumps.
Canopies.
So, yes, and it just becomes this beacon that really doesn't fit in a lot of times. I've seen them put up in smaller villages at different places, and they're so out of sync with the rest of the buildings there. You know, because the zoning doesn't prevent it in a lot of places. So if I don't know if it's an issue for any of the gas stations that are currently here. A lot of them have already gone that route. But I think it's something we should look at.
Yeah, Brad, have you guys been thinking about that? I mean, so out Central Avenue in Colony, there's like a big new huge, Cumberland Farms, and another one out in Guilderland, I think near 156 or something like that. Might work for those areas, but certainly something that seems out of scale for what we are likely to want in the city.
I mean, it's very difficult to design the gas stations in a way that's, sympathetic to the general character of the city. It's sort of like you learn to live with them to a certain degree. I mean, we tried with Colvin and Washington, for instance, to get the building up to the street. But then we had, they still want the door to be on the back if you put the gas pumps in the back. So then you have a building with up to the street without a door on it. So it's very difficult to design them. I mean, I've seen it. It has been done on corner lots. It's particularly difficult where gas stations tend to locate. So we do have at least some guidance in the form-based codes in our zoning right now, and we have tried in other districts that are more urban type districts to look at new designs, but kind of reluctant partners in the gas station industry in that.
So I do think we probably need to move on, but as we are talking about this, the beauty of electrical charging stations is you don't have to have a whole setup. Essentially, you can have them be curbside. Or like in the Hannaford parking lot, there's just two places where you can park your car and just plug it in while you go and shop or something like that. And so I'm just thinking that maybe if we were to make them permitted in pretty much all areas, having some design standards that make it not be accompanied by a store kind of thing. So that they are, I believe that they pretty much could be located pretty much any place.
Yeah, I think they're two separate issues. There's the design issue, but then there's the sort of environmental issue and the fact that we're transitioning away from seemingly gasoline-powered vehicles. Maybe not entirely, but knowing that these sites, these uses have environmental consequences. I can't say that I've read a book on it yet, so I don't know. There's still a lot to learn, I think, but. What will become of the gas station sites in the city? Are they just going to switch to, a different type of renewable fuel? Maybe not, as they're suggesting. It could be a totally different way of fueling and powering vehicles. So, starting to think about that now, I think we'll be ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Tom, I see your hand. I'm sorry, Judy. Tom,
Yeah.
I see your hand. You have more to say?
Oh yeah, I haven't had a chance to jump in here.
Wait a minute. Wait. I'm sorry, Judy. Are you done?
I just want to say, it seems like Jason would be a good person to task him with coming up with some recommendations.
Tom may know a little bit about this. I don't.
Go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, that's all right. I didn't have it up. I was trying to jump in, and then finally I put it in. So, my household, we have 5 cars between me and my wife. I have a tractor, which runs on diesel. I have a motorcycle that's gas. I've been, one of my first words was car key, according to my parents. So I love cars, but let's look at the reality. And you've touched on what I wanted to say is by 2035, General Motors is not going to be producing combustible engines anymore. Electric is going to be one thing that we're going to do. And, we do have it at the university. We have electric stations. There's 2 they come in a stanchion that will charge up 2 cars at a time. But we also got to look at, besides electric, hydrogen is another type of fuel that Toyota has been buying into. I know Plug Power is a local company here. They're doing forklifts and stuff, but eventually that's going to reach out to cars. And hydrogen is highly explosive. That's what the Hindenburg blew up with. So, you know, storing the hydrogen and stuff like that, if we do go to that, is a consideration. Also, right now, and a lot of people don't realize, and I know a lot of the state fleet uses natural gas. Compressed natural gas is another fuel that's being used. So there's a lot of stuff out there. Another consideration, in the old days, a gas station would open up, it would be like a mom and pop place. It wasn't a store. It would be an actual place where you could go in and get your car worked on if you were having a problem and you didn't want to, you know, you couldn't afford to go to the dealer. So, and I don't know, you know, this says fueling station. So I don't know if that covers auto repair, Brad. So that was one of my questions for you. How do we deal with auto repair? Is that a separate category?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yep, we have two. We have heavy vehicle repair, and we have a light vehicle repair.
Okay. And I know Tesla, you know, they'll come to your house and fix the car, you know, at your house. So yeah, I think being ahead of the curve and being prepared. My own feeling is that electric, I mean, we have electric motorcycles now. The cars, the Teslas have really shown what can happen. Volkswagen is going to go totally electric. You know, they have the new bus, the old hippie bus is going to be electric, and I have my eye maybe to sell most of my cars and get just one of those. But, you know, there's a lot of points. I just also wanted to bring up, I buy most of my gas at BJ's because it's 10 cents cheaper than everybody else. And I'll drive that distance just to get that cheaper gas. So I think having a lot of gas stations in the city isn't as critical as one might, you know, there is places you can go to get it. So, but thank you. I just wanted to get that stuff out there. Thank you.
Okay, can we move on?
Yep. Continuing onward with self-storage facility, we've seen a preponderance of these show up within the warehouse zoning district. So we're looking to limit their usage as well. You know, a lot of times with that being the sole use, those also have, you know, impacts with moving traffic with trucks and also with storage as well. And a lot of times they're not activating or really improving the community for, you know, social benefits. A lot of the times they might be improving the structure that they're located within or creating a new structure that has some design elements, but a lot of the elements that we're trying to look for within mixed use are not really being met with current self-storage facilities. So looking to remove those allowances within the mixed use districts while still allowing them within the industrial zoning districts.
I have a comment on that. Zach, do you know who the most people who use these facilities are?
My guess would be renters, which we're seeing more of, but correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Well, no, I'm just making you guess. I'm sorry. But the number one use is people when they get divorced. You know, and that's the big thing. When people get divorced, they split up the household and they need a place to put their stuff while they're trying to figure out what to do with the rest of their lives. So I just want to make sure that we're aware of that. You know, I don't know what the divorce rate is. I know at one time it was very high. It was more than 50%. So again, you know, I know that there's the storage place that I've used on by the Hudson River there downtown, right on the edge of the port. I know there's a storage facility, I think on Central Avenue, you know, down in the Calvin area. So, and it's next to the highway. So I'm just hoping that we don't totally, you know, I don't know if places be grandfathered in or not, but I think it does serve a purpose for our residents.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that, whatsoever. And whether you're getting divorced or whether you're maybe taking on things from a family member who's passed along, or you're in a relationship maybe where you're not married, because a lot of people are not getting married as frequently, but still have the same issue of splitting up household items as well. It's important to think about. We've just seen, there's 2 existing U-Hauls along 787, and there's a self-storage facility along I-90. There's 2 existing U-Haul facilities also in Manans as well. So it seems like there is a good number of U-Hauls and other similar self-storage facilities within the city. So looking to really identify, are we saturated with this use? Is it serving enough people that it needs to, and if it is, then this makes sense. And if not, maybe looking to figure out a way where it's still meeting those needs, but doing it in a way where it doesn't inhibit growth and has an opportunity for more benefits than we're currently seeing now from a lot of facilities.
Yeah, the environmental impact too is pretty low with them. They don't have any type of electricity use, most of them, or I just don't see anything that would add to the greenhouse gas except for the cars pulling in and loading stuff off and on. But like you just said when I was making your guess, we do have an awful lot of apartments going up in the city, and if people are moving from apartment to apartment, they need a temporary place to put their stuff. It might be something to keep in mind. Thank you.
So I'm wondering if in some of these cases, we want to make it an accessory use to encourage an apartment house to maybe include as part of their design plans some self-storage units for people who don't want to get a 2-bedroom, but they need more storage than a 1-bedroom offers. The other thing I just want to comment on is the whole time we were talking about the USDO, we talked about how we wanted to recognize uses that exist in certain areas so that we didn't have so many that were considered to be non-conforming use. And this is kind of going counter to that. I'm not a big fan of these being part of the routine urban fabric. So I like the idea of putting it in the industrial areas, but I do wonder if it may be something that we need to accommodate as an accessory use for some places.
My initial thought was that I was very comfortable with this too, because I just see them popping up everywhere. And, I guess I really didn't think it through, Tom, until you talked about a little bit of the real need. I see them, my thought was, that people end up just leaving stuff in these storage facilities. It's an alternative to not dealing with your stuff, moving it on, and so on and so forth. But, I hear what you're saying about, Zach, about renters. Tom, what you're saying about broken up households. So, there's a lot to consider here. But I do tend to agree with you, Judy, that it doesn't fit in real well with the urban fabric, as you mentioned. And, I like to see them in industrial areas, I think.
Any other questions or comments on this?
Brad, the storage place, it's right by Home Depot on Central Avenue. Do you know, is that zoned industrial, or do you know what the zoning there is?
I think it's zoned mixed use community highway.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, we may want to take a more tempered approach. There are perhaps existing buildings that I could see this being a potentially good reuse, or at least an interim reuse. I do think we need to be conscious of, when these are located in a commercial zone, in a neighborhood district, or even a community scale urban district, that really doesn't provide any vibrancy or life streetscape. So I think there at least needs to be a combination of other uses in conjunction with them on the ground level, or something to that effect. And like you said, that mixed use community highway, I mean, maybe we should consider that as a conditional use or something to that effect. They did seem to find like the perfect place on Russell Road at the end of the road for that self-storage facility. That was an MUCH, so.
You got me nervous because Russell
However-
Road's by my house. Now, I'm
North,
just
North Russell Road.
Yeah. Hey, Brad, I just noticed now it says allowance for new self-storage. So existing ones would be okay. That was my concern.
Yes, although, as Judy sort of alluded to, they would become non-conforming. So we do need to be conscious when we're making something non-conforming that there are potential impacts on them wanting to expand or alter or potentially obtain a loan or a financial line of credit. So they would continue to be permitted, but we always do need to be aware of those consequences. So we'll see where self-storage facilities are in the state currently, and that may be able to guide us a little bit as to how many we have out there.
Thank you.
The area around Memorial Hospital is also community highway. And I don't know that I would love to see this kind of thing around there. And then there's the area around Mount Hope and the thruway exit area that is community highway. Here's the thing. A lot of it has to do with the design of them, as much, of the current design, these, tin shacks with, garage doors and bright orange and beige and whatever. And I do wonder, Brad, when you're, the idea of having, I want to say, an elevator building potentially of 3 stories and the first story being having commercial uses in it, other uses in it, and having storage be above that would be something, if the building was designed essentially so that it could be easily converted to a residential building or something, that might not be offensive, that might not be problematic, and it's a better land use because you are using the first floor for some vibrancy.
I think that's a great point. I
just
like
have a-
that idea.
I have a question real quick. If we make them non-conforming uses and they want to expand, I just want to hear that would impact their financing or any expansion in the future, correct?
Correct.
I mean, yeah, banks do look at that when they're extending a loan, whether if something were to be destroyed or couldn't be rebuilt in kind for whatever reason, it may be a higher rate or it may be a decline of the loan.
Okay, because I know one thing, my first coming into Albany was because I attended the university, and storage units were a big thing for the undergrads and graduates because of the some of them are here year round, some of them are here just for the season, just for the semesters. But I know it was a big thing. But with this, we're just limiting brand new ones. But is there a way maybe to like a mechanism where we can limit the new ones, but still keep the conforming uses? Because I just know that some storage units, they're a thriving business. I'll be honest, they're a thriving business, but they do contribute to housing shortage as well, because it's cheaper to run a storage unit than to build a house or an apartment building. So I just wonder if maybe because of our landscape with a lot of colleges here, if this would impact the overall, would that like have a substantial impact on viability for college students when they come in?
I think that's a good question. There have been many good questions on this one, so we have some follow-up to do.
And I think also just looking at the regional impacts too of how many people from outside of the city are storing, items within here as opposed to city residents using that as well. Because we also don't want the city to be, a dumping ground for people's stuff as well. We want it to be something that's used by city residents and supporting city residents.
Right, absolutely.
All right, let's move on.
Continuing onward, for drive-in or drive-through facility, removing this as either an accessory or conditional use in the majority of mixed-use zoning districts, while still allowing for it in the mixed-use community highway zoning district and the both industrial zoning districts. And a lot of this comes from, again, the environmental impacts that drive-throughs have with idling. And there are also a lot of design aspects too, where the design of buildings to accommodate a drive-through don't promote good urban design. We've seen a lot of drive-throughs pop up and become more used through COVID. But again, they still leave out people who don't have access to cars, who are walking or cycling certain uses, and they want to also see, the benefits for grab and go service as well. So I think this could be something, while we're seeing a lot of national chains wanting to increase the use of this, trying to curb that and promote, quick and convenient service for people who own or don't own cars as well, whether that be, a pickup window that you walk to, or promoting the idea that, employees who work at these facilities bring out goods or services to people to their cars. So I think it's just trying to get it, again, better design, not promoting as much car usage, while still recognizing that this is something that we've seen increase over the past year. Whether that'll keep up as we continue out of COVID is, a little to be determined. But there are options to get at the same effect using other design solutions.
Does that include banks? I mean, I use SEPQ, and a lot of times I'll use the drive-up ATM machine. And again, I don't know the zoning down by Patroon Creek. It might be highway.
I'm not sure. Again, this is looking at new drive-in or drive-through facilities. This wouldn't be looking at a sunset provision for existing ones.
Okay,
but I believe it's MUCH or MUCU.
Okay, but I don't see that this is for new.
Tom, it's a substantial change. It would be a substantial change. And we see a lot of consternation, I think, with drive-throughs when they're proposed. It's not universally the case, but, I think it's worth having a conversation of whether we need or want these in our communities. And, we go from there.
No, and I understand. And, Chase Manhattan, that, that I fought like hell to get up by me. They didn't even want to drive through. They want people to park and they'll walk over to the window. But I'm thinking there's drugstores, and with COVID being, there was times where you couldn't go in, like to do your banking and stuff. But if there was a drive-through there, you could do your banking. So I'm hoping we don't ever get hit with another type of epidemic like COVID, but we can't predict the future. So it's definitely worth talking about. But what really gets me nervous, and because I'm not from downtown, I'm from the uptown area where you can't get around without a car. I mean, or a bicycle. And I wouldn't want to ride a bicycle in the snow. And I wouldn't want my son driving a bicycle on Russell Road, Brad, as you know how dangerous that is, or even walk on it. But again, I agree with you that we should talk about it, but I get nervous that, I would like to see it maybe conditional, that where we have a little bit more say that if it is needed, we could put something in. So that's just my opinion.
I it is a very controversial issue. Just recently, they pulled their application, but Popeyes wanted to open up on the corner of Hackett and Holland Avenue. You know, that they had put in an application, and their design includes a drive-through, and that's very important to that fast food company. And you know, a lot of people are very much against that. We were happy when they pulled the application. Another place I can think of is the bank, CEFQ, over on Lower New Scotland. They have a setup where you can do your banking drive through, but they also have, that's also where you can walk up and to the window to the ATM. And it's just so crazy to have that be at the same place where cars can pull up. And then I think, Judy, the Trusco Bank over on New Scotland near us, I remember years ago before they had the drive-through, and what a great little bank that was. You had to park, you had to go in, it was very homey and so on and so forth. And now, of course, they've got the drive-through, so you don't ever have to go in and talk to the, you know, the people behind the counter. You know, it's really a little less, it's fast, it's quick, it's convenient, but there is something to be said for having to park, or walk up. You know, we have such a walkable neighborhood on New Scotland Avenue, and go and do your business. So I see both sides of this, but and Tom, I get it. Up in the 15th ward, you know, you really have to drive. You can't really walk to these banks.
And, you know, just to counter, you know, we're all heading towards, you know, old age. And as you get older, it gets a lot harder to walk. You know, I had attacks of gout, and there's no way I could walk. I mean, my foot was so swollen, the pain, but I'm able to get into a car and drive. I mean, we got to, and it's hard. I mean, environmentally, you know, I understand it, but what happens if we do switch over to electric cars? I mean, will we be doing the same type of polluting and stuff? And again, I bring up about COVID. You couldn't go into that bank during the height of the epidemic. So what do? You have no money. I mean, it's, I think we need to look at it. Go ahead.
I'd like to chime in here. I don't like drive-throughs. I mean, I think, you know, a McDonald's drive-through or a Burger King, you know, on Central Avenue is fine. I wasn't thrilled with the push to have the drive-through for that bank, but Kathy, I got to tell you, I love the design of the bank. It is, to me, it's so much more friendly. I don't use the drive-through. You know, I will walk in, and it is handicap accessible. I hated that ugly wooden ramp that they had previously. It was just not, you know, designed well. I think it's a more, you know, we made sure we listened to Jack Alvarez and his recommendation to make sure the design of it was a little bit more consistent with the other buildings on our commercial street. And I think so I like that, but I don't care about the drive-through. And I gotta say that in all the times that I drive back along Ontario, I have never once seen somebody pulling out of the drive-through in that area. So I don't think it was necessarily needed. The other thing I gotta say, I think I'm in a bank once a year. I don't, I kind of don't now it helps that Tom goes, you know, to the bank, but generally I mail in deposits. I have direct deposit. I have direct pay, you know, out of my account. I know most people know how to do, you know, deposit by, you know, using their phone, whatever. I get, when I need cash, I get it out of an ATM. so that whole thing, with regard to banks needing this, I wonder it did help during COVID, for a lot of people. And I think that businesses probably use banks a little bit more than, and need the fiscal structures. I am concerned about us losing those storefronts, the storefront banks, and what they will be used for in the future. But I think it's appropriate to limit drive-throughs. I don't know. I don't know if an absolute ban on them is appropriate so much as putting a different kind of series of restrictions on their approval. I don't know if a conditional use permit is appropriate. A variance seems maybe a little too harsh in some places, but in general, I wouldn't mind floating this without having drive-throughs and see what other people think about that. The main thing I hate about drive-throughs is, as somebody who walks a lot, is that they create unexpected traffic. It's not great walking along and having both an entrance and exit to deal with when it comes to drive-throughs. So there's 2 curb cuts associated with it and through traffic on it. Often, in addition, and often they need additional space in the way of a curb cut, because here's where you go to the drive-through and here's where you go into the parking lot area. So
Yeah, that's a good point. So what do you want to do with this planning staff? Very mixed.
I think we wanted to put it out there and just kind of float the subject and see what kind of feedback. I don't think we're tied to any specific answer, but it's something that comes up a lot and it's healthy to have a conversation.
Mhm.
So for now, I think we got to move on.
And then Brad had mentioned the addition for short-term rentals potentially. This is listed as A right now, but again, we're looking to get feedback on short-term rentals going forward. Just something to think about. We see, there's a lot of Airbnbs throughout the city, which I think was brought up at the last meeting. But there could be potential options, within for things like glamping or outdoor short-term rentals as well. So just something to think about, as we're looking through this, whether this is something that's addressed now or through a separate ordinance.
Glamping?
Yeah, so just more formalized campsites.
Okay.
I think it's a portmanteau of I think glamour or just glam and camping.
Okay. I have heard that before. I'm sorry.
They do a lot on Roosevelt Island.
Where would we glamp here in Albany? Tivoli Park?
Yeah.
Where on earth is there Albany glamping? Because I'm totally in, but I was just curious where it is.
It figures Ginny would pop up now.
Along the riverfront.
No.
Oh.
I got a couple of acres. If anybody wants to come and rent the site, I'll be glad to do it.
We can all have an outing at Tom's and glamp.
Oh boy, that would be newsworthy.
And I think on even a more informal end, we've heard some interest, I think, within Tivoli, not for anything permanent. And usually glamping is a little bit more permanent, but doing, even just starting to do like educational outreach through camping and programming for kids. But, even thinking about that going forward, if there's areas in the city where maybe there's an educational element or programming element along with camping without, those physical modifications, thinking about that just as we're developing short-term rental standards.
I got a question. This came up in my neighborhood. People are afraid that with the grouper law, that how many people can be in a residence, like, or an apartment or a house, how many different. And in talking to Rick LaJoy, there's really no way to enforce it. And I'm just bringing up, how do you know if somebody's short term or not? And how would you enforce it if it, the short term became, like with an Airbnb, with like a half-year lease or a year lease? How would we regulate that?
We don't know yet. Judy asked the same question. I think it's a good question. I'm confident that there's ways to do these things, but we need to talk to Rick and others about that.
Devil's in the details.
Yeah, and I mean, there are other cities that have regulated this so that, the city keeps track of where all the Airbnbs are. They're required to register with the city and so on and so forth. We have to get hold of some model legislation on it because it is an issue. We have a whole house just up the street from me that's an Airbnb rental, and that little strip over near me on New Scotland, thanks to Judy and the new cafe area out there, it's a really desirable place. All those restaurants, so it's kind of a great place for these rentals. So I do have this vision of them, quite a few of them popping up right in this neighborhood. And how do you limit it? Because it does after a while, change the quality of the neighborhood a little bit. And is that what you want? So I think it's definitely something we have to look at.
I'm also very concerned about how short-term rentals can change the affordability of housing in an entire neighborhood or entire city. When somebody can make $5,000 renting out something, a month, as opposed to maybe, if it was a long-term rental getting, $1,500 or $2,000, that makes a big difference. And I have visited cities and stayed in Airbnbs where some lovely locations have essentially were taken over by that, and in some cases seemingly to make the area a ghost town. So we have to be real careful about this as an issue.
Yeah,
and we've seen that in Hudson, New York, too, where there's, high preponderance of Airbnbs as well. So I think, we're not quite to that point yet. So it's a good time to look at that to avoid those situations and make sure that the city still can be affordable. And I'm sorry, council member, go on.
Sure. No, one of the things I was going to bring up, like Judy said, if I rent out a place and it's $5,000 a month, who gets that? Does the owner keep the money, or does the city, for providing services and stuff? How do we get any kind of revenue out of that? And it could add work to our, our fire department, our police, and other things. So I don't know how other cities have worked that out, but it's definitely worth thinking about.
I believe it would be the hotel tax, but I think that has to happen at a county level. So that's certainly a part of this conversation. And, this is, something that we know we need to work on. I don't know, when we'll have a clear resolution as to what to do. There's a lot of moving parts, but this is generally how cities regulate them through zoning code, would be through short-term rental provision.
I want to note that we are just barely halfway through this presentation. I appreciate staff doing this whole presentation. I'm wondering if it makes sense to go through the rest and maybe have a little less dialogue on it. And I'm guilty here.
Yeah, I think I can do it, I think, quickly.
Is there a time at which we should agree to end? 8:30? Does that work for people?
I would say I probably have about a half an hour in me before I completely lose the ability to focus. So 8:20. Is that
I'd just
all right?
like to add that I'd hate to rush through this. I mean, that was what happened with the original USDO. It was kind of pushed through without understanding. I really appreciate the line by line detail that we're going over this. This is a tremendous amount of work, but thank you for, everybody for working on it.
Sure. Well, the good news is sort of just an intro to some of the other things we're looking at doing or considering with Article 2. It's probably not going to generate too much dialogue, so I think I can get through it pretty quickly. Zach, you got the PowerPoint, so I guess I'll just say when to switch here. Okay, so Article 2 is a section of the code that really lays out the zoning districts that are available within the city. There are currently 6 residential districts, 10 mixed-use districts, and 3 special purpose districts. As Zach had sort of spoken to previously, the special purpose districts really should probably be more industrial districts and then open space districts. So we're looking at changing those 2 classifications. And I sent around a separate sheet that just put the individual districts and their purpose statements, which are important to look at and consider, as well as new images that we've had produced that, while not perfect, I think they're a lot better than what's currently in the code. That the images in the code now, they don't really have sidewalks in the right place. They don't really have trees and other, sort of considerations that are natural and that we want to see in the urban environment. So certainly we don't want to create the impression that a district is all buildings and nothing else, and that's sometimes what the existing images too. So I was just going to go through them quickly here, Zach. If you actually, if you could skip 2 ahead, these are duplicate slides. Oh,
Actually,
right. Sorry, go ahead,
Brad. I've been through this. 2 things.
Yep.
First of all, I think that hopefully some people had a chance to read your memo regarding the changes that are being made. What we're seeing here now, I just want to be clear, what we're seeing here now is what Article 2 essentially would be condensed to. This would be the entire Article 2 as revised. Is that correct?
I'm going to get into that further in the slide. I just wanted to go over, but generally, yes, most of the content in Article 2 is either duplicative or should reside somewhere else within the code. So we're proposing to just simplify it and have the different districts, purpose statements, and the graphic image. The rest of the content would either be relocated or it's already existing somewhere else in the code.
And I want to endorse this, number 1. Number 2, these slides, this information is now on slides that are horizontal, and they were provided to us as horizontal. And I want to caution us on changing a code and having the pages go sideways. You can accomplish this vertically by having the text portion of these, for the most part, be narrower, less wide cells in this, and I think you can get it into a vertical format.
This wouldn't be what it would look like. This was just so council members could get an idea of the individual districts without overthinking it. Just here's the district, here's its purpose, and here's a general image of what that district looks like. So it's separate from any code changes. I'm going to get into the changes as we move forward.
Okay, great.
So Zach, I think you can go through these really quickly. I mean, anyone can follow up and consult them. Just click through these slides. So we would appreciate council members taking a look at those purpose statements specifically and any feedback. The first couple, as you saw, those were changes that we had already talked about with respect to changing single family to single unit, et cetera. Next slide, Zach. Okay, this is just to give it. So the first section in each of these Article 2 zoning districts is the concept drawing, and this just shows the example of what pre-existing image in the RT. I'm using the RT district as an example, so we don't go through every district. There'll be similar changes made to every district. This shows the RT image before and the RT image, the new image that was produced. So Zach can go to the next. And then section B of each district section is the purpose statement. As you saw, each district has a purpose statement. I'm not going to read that here, although I do want to point out there is this compliance with other standards required table that appears in each section. To me, that speaks to more of a guidance document that was in a draft of the code. I don't really see its purpose in the general code. Certainly, we don't want to convey that any of the standards aren't applicable, and really the only section that's not listed here out of the 375.4 would be 375.402, which is form-based zoning. So really that's the only difference you're going to see in any of these tables. So our proposal is just to remove those tables. I don't think that there's a lot of help given via those references, and it does take up a lot of space within the code.
I always thought it was a waste.
So for the dimensional standards, now, these charts and the axonometric images that accompany them, that's the image on the top, which each district is provided. They are kind of cool to look at. We could see using these potentially as sort of cheat sheets moving forward. However, all of the same dimensional standards that are shown here also exist in 375-4, and they're more condensed in that there's a table for all of the residential districts and the respective standards, the commercial districts, special purpose, and so forth. And as we looked, we were going through our past sort of draft of this 6-month or whatever review. We were looking at adding some standards here, and it just became really complicated because then we were going to have to go and update each of these individual images. So what we're thinking of doing is taking this axonometric drawing or a couple of these and putting them in a separate section in the back called rules of construction. It would accompany the definitions, and it would really just, this could really in most cases, it could be a detached building, but the standards are generally the same. It's showing you your minimum setback, your side setback, your building heights, et cetera. So we think having that condensed all in one location, since it is somewhat the same sort of, it's graphically depicting the same thing in a lot of cases in a more complex way. And then, the standards, again, being located elsewhere in the code, I don't think we need to go here. And just adding some additional images, like this is an example of something that we could include in that rules of construction that shows this speaks to the current regulations for building stories. As we're going through this process, I believe we're going to propose a building height in feet in addition to stories so that we can control, sites that have different elevations and things of that nature. I think the original intent of story was to not sort of have people cram into this arbitrary limit, but I think you can do both and still accomplish that purpose. So next section would be the district standard. So RT has a good number of district standards. They are generally, some of them are specific, but you're looking at number B here. I won't go through all of them, but portions of the ground floor or basement floor of a residential structure that was physically constructed or adapted to accommodate non-residential uses. So this is your typical storefront property. And when you're in a townhouse district or you're in some other districts, it also appears in R2 and RM multifamily. You have these buildings that were built with a storefront on a corner that are pre-existing. And it didn't make sense to label each of those individually and create this sort of checkerboard zoning map where you had a mixed-use neighborhood edge property here and an RT district property here. So we circled the whole district RT, but then we put in these certain carve-out allowances that if you had this pre-existing building type with a storefront, we really don't want to see you put an apartment in there and have big drapes in the window, and it really just doesn't look appropriate or attractive. In addition, some light commercial uses can add some vibrancy and be appropriate within neighborhoods. You can see the hours as well, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. is rather constricted. So how we propose dealing with this standard, for example, on, given that we're relocating all the district standards are proposing to, I'm just giving an example of how we do that. Zach, if you could go to the next slide. Our solution for this would be to add the allowance in the permitted use table with a footnote of sorts that would speak to that provision. So that's showing you that, in the R2, RT, this use is permitted, but only if in that, you got to look at number 1, only in that circumstance. There's a lot of people miss that now. And it's not totally fair when you're reading a table and it's conveying something and it's not being entirely truthful, because that is allowed. There are other cases where something says it's allowed, but it's really heavily restricted through a proximity radius. I mean, blood plasma or something like that. We'd probably have a footnote in the table as well. So if blood plasma says C, it says, well, you actually have to check that. And the idea there was you check the use specific standards and you check the district standards, which are listed in the current table at the top. But it's just really too much to have people going all over to find a quick answer to their question. And we think this could provide a better way of doing that. Another example of content probably being in the wrong place. This was something we added for pre-existing residential properties, because townhouse district in particular have a lot of multifamily properties. That's just the way in fact, there are whole blocks that are largely multifamily, but that are zoned townhouse. And what we generally heard from constituents in these areas was that they were okay with most of the existing multifamily properties. They acknowledged them. They had been there for a while, but they didn't want to necessarily see new multifamily properties. So that's the reason this content exists. Basically says it doesn't apply to those same provisions that we apply in the case of, Zach, if you could go to the next slide.
Wait. So Brad?
Yep.
So that B is a new standard that would also be being added to?
No, it's an existing standard. It's
Okay.
it's just in the wrong place. It's in the district standards. It's really it's really speaking to a pre-existing development and nonconformity, or a right that's being conveyed to that's different than other pre-existing nonconformities. So you see the current language that exists. This is essentially an opt-out or carve-out of this provision for those certain types of buildings, those multifamily buildings in RT that were constructed that way or had been converted that way, that are allowed to exist and are considered conforming. It's a very convoluted way of getting at that issue. It would have been easier to just say that block is zoned multifamily and put in provisions for the conversions, but due to a variety of reasons, that's not the way it turned out. But I think it resulted in, because we were specifically speaking to that targeted issue, it made sense in the context of dialogue and adopting the code to put it in that section for townhouse that everyone was viewing and looking at. But in the general course of using the code, I don't think that's the appropriate place for it. I think that's most of the case with most of the standards in the district standards section.
I agree. I think people miss the stuff that's in Article 2 all the time.
They do. I mean, we know, because we people come into the office all the time, and that they're not necessarily aware of that. So, Zach, next slide. And then this is other content, which is a little bit harder to find a place for, but it does apply across multiple districts. And it really comes down to, and this is something I think we need feedback on. It's always been a a conversation piece in the city of Albany since I've been here, and it's the ability to convert or not convert, or under what conditions convert existing dwellings that may be a one-family dwelling, they may be a two-family. You're looking to add additional units, and obviously investors and such are always looking to add additional units. In some cases, it can be beneficial in increasing affordable housing in some circumstances, but we want to be done in a way that doesn't totally wreck the building, so it can't be reversed. These are standards that apply now that currently reside in the district standards section of the RT, the R2, and there may be in the RM as well. So this I don't think we have a solution for yet. It could reside in the use specific standards under single family or two family dwellings. We may want to create a new section of code for it, or we may decide we don't want to see people pursuing conversions of houses. I think that in the right circumstances, there's a lot of cases where someone has a one-family house, townhouse downtown, and they want to add a unit in the basement to supplement their to pay the mortgage. Totally reasonable. I think this is sort of a back-end way of getting at home ownership, which is not something we're supposed to regulate through zoning. So I do caution that approach or sentiment, but there are consequences from other avenues too of breaking up buildings that were built for one purpose to be another purpose. Sometimes that's a good and necessary thing. When you have a 10,000 square foot townhouse downtown, there's not really a big market for 10,000 square foot houses, but other times it's not necessarily what we want to see. So we kind of want to tease out whether these provisions are working. When they have gone to the planning board, generally they have been approved. So we do want to get feedback on whether that process is working or not. I'll leave that conversation largely for another day, although you're welcome to chime in. Zach, just moving on.
I do just want to, I think that Richard, is very helpful. He brings his perspective. I bring my perspective from my neighborhood. On that. So I think that is something for a discrete discussion at some point on that particular.
Yeah, and I think originally when we were doing the drafting, we had identified certain building types that may be appropriate for certain types of conversions versus others. I feel like it got dumbed down a little bit when it got actually the final version of the code, so we could sort of revisit that as well. This is something we're considering, and I'm just going to be really quick on this, but the form-based zoning districts, they each have a regulating plan. And within that regulating plan, there are 4 form-based districts. Within that regulating plan are sort of these sub-regulating areas or districts that is how the zoning is applied. So one of the things we're contemplating as sort of a bigger issue to come out of this process or to follow it up is taking these districts and actually not calling them mixed use form-based warehouse or form-based South End, but creating districts that are mixed-use core, walkable center, industrial warehouse, and there's a couple of others. Now that wouldn't change anything fundamentally for how these districts are regulated. Zach, you can go to the next slide. But it does, as you can see, it would give us some additional districts to sort of work with. And I've always felt that maybe we needed a couple of extra districts to deal with neighborhoods that are developing, that want a little bit more of a conveyance of allowances. There may be some areas that are, again, I just think it's better to have more options available. And I think to the extent that people feel that there are certain districts missing, there may be an ability to use this to tweak some of the existing districts to have similar but slightly different conveyances. I know in some cases we have lower building heights in lower areas of the city, and maybe that's more appropriate at the mixed use NC district, for instance. There's a disagreement of 4 stories on Lark Street is not a lot, but 4 stories on New Scotland or Western Avenues is more significant. So again, there may be a way through these changes to make some of those distinctions. And
So we'll get into discussion on these at a later point is the point.
That's the idea. We need to flesh it out. There's a lot of content related to form-based that all needs to be sort of evaluated for how this would impact that. So not having gotten into that in detail, I don't know if we're going to be able to accomplish as a part of this process. But I think these are the issues we're trying to identify that may, as we finish this process, maybe this is the next issue that we tackle or the next issue going forward. And I think
it's intriguing.
Yeah.
When I look at this, I think that the council members whose wards have those form-based districts need to be engaged, and I think that makes this potentially a little too ambitious for this part of our project, but I look forward to your working that problem and seeing what you come up with. I mean, if somebody gets on a tear and is tackling that and wants to present it, I'd love to see how it shakes out.
That's good. I appreciate you reeling me in a little bit, because sometimes I get these big ideas. But okay, and it says we have 5 slides left, but I can't even think of what they are. So Zach, I don't know if you want to.
The next one was just the E-code renumbering, just since Councilmember Hoy had brought that up, but that was already addressed at the beginning of the presentation. And then this is a reminder for the project website. And then some of the other slides were just reference slides that were included in the previous presentation, but there were no content changes as a component of them. So they were just there if we had questions on them or comments on them.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I'm in the dark here. I wasn't looking at my own video, so I didn't know that. But yeah, and I did email E-code to follow up. I don't really understand. I mean, I'm not trying to hate on them, but they're, they uploaded it twice without asking us, and then we asked them, and they're taking a while to get it up. So I'm a little perplexed, but.
Hey, Brad, with the water edge, is that because we're going to get that canal on Broadway? Is that what your thinking was?
We're getting a canal on Broadway?
You haven't read the paper? Somebody's proposed putting
I read that 15 years ago.
Just recently came up. But one of the questions I have for you is when you were looking at the table and you said these are like footnotes, will we have hypertext? So if you went to that, if you're online, you're looking at it and you click on it, is that something we can do where you can just click on it and get a hypertext?
We can. I think it's a question of where exactly you want that to be. I mean, it could be all over the document, so we need to be careful. But yeah, we can do that. Okay.
I just think it would make it easy for a lot of people, because right now going through the hard copy, it's you try to reference. So, hopefully I don't expect it overnight, but thank you. It was a great presentation.
Okay, we're done.
I look forward to, a real key component. Article 2 and what you're doing with Article 2 and paring it down significantly and eliminating the duplication so that you're not having to amend something in Article 2 when you're amending in Article 4 is a beautiful thing. But making sure that the standards do get into Article 4 for the most part, and all those district standards wind up, someplace, and we don't drop something out accidentally, I think is going to be a real key. The other thing I just want to note is while it's intuitive for people to go looking for the standards, I do think that as you list the first thing under, this is just my input, under 375, 203, the residential districts, and then 375, 204, the mixed use districts, that as you, before listing the first type of district in that, I think it would be helpful to simply insert something to the effect that lot dimensions, setbacks, building and district standards are found in Article 4, and then refer people to the specific chart or section that is. And one of the reasons why I say this is I think that sometimes people go to Article 4 and they're looking at the wrong chart and not finding what they're looking for. So that's just a little drafting, editing comment.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
might be a good example of some hyperlinks we could add in. So we'll think about that. I think we think we need to see how the new code works online too, and what we can do there. But
Great.
that's a good idea. Thanks.
Anything, okay, anything else? I have down here that our next meeting is on Tuesday, May 4th at 5:30.
See you then.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much for all your work, Zach. And
Yes,
Bray.
absolutely. Have a good
Thank you.
night, rest of
Thanks.
the night.
Take care.
All right.
Have a good
Good
night.
night, everybody.